My son said I was useless, so I turned his abandoned train station into a place he couldn't forget. I never thought the cruelest words I'd ever hear would come from my own son. "Mom, you're useless now. I can't have you hanging around and embarrassing me." The door slammed shut before I could even catch my breath. I stood there on his porch in Austin, clutching my old suitcase in one hand and the only family photo I managed to save in the other. His house looked like something from a magazine, polished wood floors, glass walls, spotless perfection. And me, I was just the wrinkle in his curated world, the shadow he wanted to erase. Just a week earlier, a storm had taken everything from me. The small rental I called home flooded overnight, swallowing my furniture, my books, the few keepsakes of my life. With nowhere else to go, I turned to Ethan, the boy I raised on peanut butter sandwiches and second-hand clothes, the boy I once believed was my whole purpose. But the man who opened that door wasn't my boy anymore. His suit was pressed, his smile cold, his words sharper than any storm I had weathered. The sound of that door closing wasn't just wood on hinges. It was the sound of 30 years of sacrifice being dismissed in one breath. And standing in the rain that night, I realized something I never thought I'd feel about my own son. I wasn't welcome in his life. The motel smelled of bleach and stale smoke. The kind of place where the wallpaper curled at the edges and the lampshades leaned crooked like they'd given up. I set my suitcase on the bed and sat down hard, the springs groaning under my weight. I don't cry easily. Not when I buried my sister without a single family member beside me. Not when the bank repossessed my old car. Not even when the storm swept away the home I'd built piece by piece. But that night, in that broken room, the tears came hot and silent. Because I realized something I'd been too stubborn to admit. I wasn't just homeless. I had become unwanted. I raised Ethan alone. His father left when he was 10, leaving me with a child, a mortgage, and a half-dead Buick that coughed smoke whenever it rained. I worked dawn shifts at the station, selling tickets, and night shifts hemming pants at a tailor shop, just to keep the lights on. There were nights I went hungry so Ethan could eat a real dinner. Days I walked miles to work because I couldn't afford gas. I never remarried. Never wanted to bring another man into my son's life unless I was sure he'd stay. None ever did. And for what? So that years later, standing on his perfect porch, I could hear my own child call me useless. I lay down on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling stained with old leaks. The hum of the vending machine outside my door buzzed louder than my own heartbeat. I thought of the little boy who once pressed his face to train windows, whispering about all the places he'd go one day. I thought of the nights I patched his jackets by candlelight, promising myself he'd never feel the cold the way I did. But now, the only cold I felt was the kind that came from being forgotten. The next morning, I couldn't bear the smell of bleach and the hum of that motel any longer. My feet carried me down cracked sidewalks, back toward the part of town where Ethan grew up. The old neighborhood looked smaller somehow, paint peeling from porches, fences leaning tiredly, yards overrun with weeds. But the memories still clung to every corner. That tree on Oak Street was where Ethan used to climb until his jeans tore at the knees. The corner store still had the same faded Coca-Cola sign, though the glass door squeaked louder than before. And then I saw her. Mrs. Alvarez, my old neighbor, sitting on her porch with a wide straw hat and a mug of coffee, just like she used to when we were young mothers watching our kids play tag in the yard. "Linda Parker," she called out, squinting into the sunlight. "Is that really you?" Before I could answer, she set her mug down and hustled off the porch faster than I thought her 80-year-old legs could carry her. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled of coffee and lavender soap, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pulling back to study my face. I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. I lost my home, and my son, he doesn't want me around. I don't even know who I am anymore. Her eyes sharpened, just like they used to when she caught Ethan sneaking cookies. She shook her head firmly. Don't you dare say that. You're the same woman who kept this whole block alive. You were out there selling tickets at dawn, sewing uniforms at night, and still had time to bring me soup when I was sick. You raised that boy with nothing but grit and hope. You haven't disappeared, Linda. You've just forgotten yourself. Her words cut through the fog I'd been drowning in. For a moment, I saw myself the way she did, not as useless, not as discarded, but as someone who had once held a whole world together with bare hands. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed my arm, her voice low and certain. You still got fight in you, Querida. You just forgot how to use it. I walked away from that porch lighter than when I'd arrived. My pockets were still empty, but my heart carried something heavier than money, her words. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't finished yet. That night back at the motel, I pulled out the one thing I had guarded through every storm, every layoff, every lonely year. A faded ledger notebook wrapped in rubber bands. Inside were decades of scribbles only I could read. Every overtime check I'd hidden away. Every dollar from sewing uniforms late into the night. A small pension from the rail union. Even the rolled coins I'd stacked in coffee tins when Ethan was still a boy. I added it up under the flickering motel lamp. The total wasn't much, not enough to impress anyone, least of all my son. But it was more than scraps. It was proof that I had never stopped building, even when the world thought I had nothing left. I asked myself, what do you do when your own child tells you you're useless? The answer came sharper than the motel's buzzing light. You prove you're not, without saying a word. 2 days later, my search took me to the edge of town. That's where I saw it. The old train station, boarded windows, roof sagging, vines curling up its brick walls. Most folks had forgotten it even existed, but I hadn't. I used to bring Ethan here as a boy. He'd sit cross-legged on the platform, sketching wild designs in his notebook. How one day he'd transform this crumbling station into a place filled with light, art, and stories. But he'd traded that dream for glass towers and corner offices. I stepped closer, running my hand along the cracked bricks. My reflection stared back faintly in the broken glass of the ticket window, tired, older, but still standing. And in that moment, I decided, if my son couldn't remember the dream that once made him alive, then I would. And I would bring it back to life, piece by piece. Weeks blurred into sweat and sawdust. My hands blistered, my back ached. But every nail I drove into those old beams felt like stitching myself back together. Volunteers trickled in, retired carpenters, teenagers needing service hours, even Mrs. Alvarez with her paintbrush steady as ever. Slowly, the station began to breathe again. Fresh paint covered the graffiti, soft yellow lights glowed through the cleaned windows, and flowers sprouted where weeds had ruled the platform for years. Inside, the benches gleamed under new polish, and the waiting hall no longer smelled of mildew, but of fresh coffee donated by a neighbor's cafe. The day the last board was nailed, I stepped back onto the platform. The sun hit the glass just right, and for the first time in decades, the station looked alive. I lifted my phone, snapped a single photograph, just one. The old train station, reborn. No caption, no explanation. I sent it to Ethan. It didn't take long. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. Mom, his voice cracked, uneasy. Why did you send me this picture? That station, it looks like. Yes, I said, my voice steady. It looks like your dream. There was silence on the line, heavy, trembling. You actually rebuilt it. I did, I replied. You may have forgotten, Ethan, but I never did. And before he could say another word, I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. The first strike had landed. 2 nights later, headlights swept across the gravel outside the station. I was inside, wiping down the ticket counter when the front doors groaned open. It was Ethan. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his eyes wild like he hadn't slept in days. He stood in the middle of the waiting hall, staring at the glowing lamps, the polished benches, the painted walls. "You really did this," he whispered, almost to himself. I nodded. "I told you, Ethan, some dreams don't die even if you abandon them." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing, restless. Finally, he stopped, his voice cracking. "Mom, there's something I never told you." I felt the air shift, heavy, expectant. He swallowed hard. "Dad, he tried to come back more than once. He called. He wrote letters. He even came by the old house when I was 16. The room tilted. My knees nearly buckled. "What?" "I told him to leave," Ethan said, words tumbling out in jagged bursts. "I told him we didn't need him, that you were better off without him. I thought I was protecting you. I was so angry I couldn't forgive him for leaving us, so I buried him. I buried everything." I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. For decades, I had carried the weight of abandonment like a scar carved into bone. And now, standing in front of me, my son was telling me the truth I had never been allowed to know. "You mean all these years?" My voice broke. Ethan's face crumpled. Tears streaked down his cheeks. "It was me, Mom. I built the wall. I kept him out, and I never told you because I was scared you'd hate me." I stared at him, fury and grief warring inside me. My hands trembled as I whispered, "You didn't protect me, Ethan. You stole my choice. You let me believe I was unwanted when I wasn't." He dropped to a bench, shoulders shaking, sobbing like the boy he once was. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would twist me like this. I didn't know it would make me turn on you too." The station was quiet except for his sobs and the ticking of the old clock above the doors. And in that silence, I realized the truth was heavier than the lie, but at least it was real. Ethan wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, but his eyes were still burning. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, voice breaking. "I thought if I pushed him away, you wouldn't have to bleed all over again." I felt my chest tighten, anger surging up with the grief. "Protecting me." My voice rose, sharp and unforgiving. "You weren't protecting me, Ethan. You were punishing me. You made me believe I was abandoned, that I wasn't worth fighting for. You let me carry that shame for decades." He stood, his voice louder now, jagged with desperation. "And what about me, Mom? You think it was easy. I was 16, furious, watching you work yourself to death, watching him vanish. I hated him for leaving. I hated you for hurting. And I hated myself because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix any of it." His words ricocheted off the station walls, raw and ugly. "You called me useless." I snapped, stepping closer, tears blurring my vision. "Do you know what that did to me? After I gave up everything, my sleep, my youth, my happiness for you. You climbed so high, Ethan, you forgot who built the ground under your feet." He flinched like I had struck him. His hands trembled as he shouted back. "And you think I don't know that? Every promotion, every dollar, every glass office, it all felt like a debt I could never pay. And instead of gratitude, all I had left was guilt. I couldn't face you, Mom. So I turned you into the problem because it was easier than admitting I was the one broken." The station shook with our voices, like the echo of trains that no longer came. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. But instead, I drew myself up, steady as the beams I had rebuilt. "No more," I said, low but fierce. "You don't get to bury me under your guilt. You don't get to erase me because it's convenient. I am your mother, Ethan, not your shame, not your secret, your mother." He broke then. His knees gave out and he sank onto the bench, sobbing, his face in his hands. And for the first time in 30 years, the silence between us finally shattered. The night after our fight, the station was quiet. Not the suffocating quiet that had haunted me for years, but a waiting kind of stillness, like the tracks holding their breath for a train that was finally on its way. Ethan didn't leave. He stayed, sleeping on a cot in the corner of the ticket office, the same place where I once counted dimes to buy his school shoes. In the morning, I found him outside on the platform, sleeves rolled, hair unkempt, hammer in hand. His expensive watch lay forgotten on the bench. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the man in polished offices and glass towers. He looked like my boy again. "I don't know how to fix all this," he said, his voice rough. "But maybe I can start here." He drove the first nail into a loose board, crooked, clumsy, but it held. That day we worked side by side, sanding benches, painting walls, planting flowers where weeds had claimed the tracks. Curious kids from the neighborhood wandered in and ended up sweeping floors. Mrs. Alvarez arrived with sandwiches, teasing Ethan that he was finally putting those architect hands to good use. And for the first time in decades, we laughed. Real laughter. The kind that shook the dust out of the rafters. Weeks turned into months. The station became more than brick and timber. It became a refuge. Children sprawled across the floor with library books. Veterans gathered at the waiting benches, telling stories they'd buried for years. Retired conductors returned to give tours of old locomotives. And every night, the station glowed, warm light spilling out onto the tracks like hope arriving right on schedule. Ethan sketched plans for new spaces, a reading lounge, an art studio, a small stage for music. But every blueprint, every design he laid before me. "Does this feel right, Mom?" he'd ask. That question alone was healing. One evening, during our first community night, folding chairs lined the waiting hall. Voices rose in song, stories filled the air, and the station trembled not with trains but with life. I watched from the back as Ethan stood before the crowd, hands trembling. His voice cracked, but he spoke anyway. "My mother raised me with nothing but grit and love. I once called her useless, but she gave me back the dream I abandoned. This station stands because of her. And tonight, I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for a second chance." The room went still, and then applause came, loud, unrelenting, like a freight train rushing past at midnight. I sat in the back, tears sliding down my cheeks, not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to. Justice hadn't come as revenge. It came as rebuilding, one nail, one story, one silence finally broken. That night, as we locked the doors and the lamps glowed behind us, Ethan slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Home isn't where the trains stop," he whispered. "It's where you choose to stay." I leaned against him, tired but lighter than I'd been in decades. And for the first time in years, I believed him.